So there's going to be a lot of speculation here, a lot of me extrapolating and kind of making stuff up, just because canon of the Animorph universe is not. It's extensive. It's not particularly well developed. There's a lot of contradiction, and the person who wrote it wrote like a couple other things like megamorphs and ultramorphs or whatever, which is like alternate history or alternate timelines, so it kind of contradicts itself. So I'm just going to use what I was able to look up and try to come up with a coherent picture. So the Yeerks come from the Yeerk homeworld, a very creative name, like how the Andalites come from the Andalite homeworld. The Taxons come from the Taxon homeworld, and the Hork-Bajir come from the Hork-Bajir homeworld. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. I don't think there's an official pronunciation guide for the series. But the Yeerks are a race of slug-like creatures that have no eyesight and no hair. They have antennae and they can kind of sense where they're going, but by and large, they are completely helpless in their native form and had to adapt to being parasitic in nature in order to survive. The origin of the Yeerks is shrouded in mystery, and there's several different ones offered. Some people think they were created by the One and some other demonic-like entities. Other people think they came from another planet, and some people think they just natively evolved on their homeworld. I like to go with that one because it makes the most sense in the context of the story. So, on the Yeerk homeworld, they lived short lives, frequently being taken over by predators. To deal with the fact that they have no eyes or really measures of means to defend themselves, they eventually developed the ability to take over host bodies. What they do is they go in through the ear canal or some other opening, they wrap themselves around the brain of their hosts, and they mind control them. Now, for whatever reason, the Yeerks are dependent upon the sun of their homeworld, known as Kandrona. Kandrona? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, which is a radiation produced by their homeworld, and they need to have this every 3 days or else they die. As I said, they're an extremely vulnerable and pathetic race on their own. There were some apes and other very minor species on their homeworld that they were able to take over and use as hosts. But despite possessing an intelligence similar to humans or even Andalites, they were unable to develop technology or get past their extremely primitive state. I don't think they even founded tribes or anything. However, what wound up happening is a Andalite prince. Now, the Andalites are a race of beings who kind of look like centaurs. It's implied that they live a very long time and reproduce very slowly, but they're kind of the elder race of the Animorph series. They're the oldest that we know of and the most technologically advanced. So Ciro landed on the Yeerk homeworld, and he pitted the Yeerks because the Yeerks were intelligent but were incapable of really advancing. So he taught their Yeerks writing, astronomy, technology, and science. He also allowed them to take somewhat stronger hosts so they could start to develop the beginnings of a civilization. Eventually, the Yeerks, though, plotted to overthrow their benevolent overlords, and they were able to catch the Andalites off guard, seizing a number of them as hosts, as well as their spaceships. The Yeerks then began to embark on a conquest of the known universe, of the known galaxy, with the eventual goal of overthrowing the Andalites and becoming masters of all of creation. The issue that you have in the Animorphs universe is most species reproduce extremely slowly. The Andalites have a very low population, as do the Yeerks. Now, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because how Yeerks work is 3 of them will sacrifice themselves, and it claims they produce hundreds of slugs. Now, given that the Yeerk population is implied to be in the low millions, My guess is this is not very common, and they have an extremely high infant mortality rate. So their overall populations have remained small. For example, one of the planets they conquered, the Hork-Bajir homeworld, I think it was implied there is only 40,000 Hork-Bajir, which was considered a fair number, and half of them died out due to a virus superweapon. So the number of Yeerks has always been small. My estimate is 3 or 4 million, despite the fact that they have conquered a number of planets in order to obtain new and stronger hosts. The Yeerks' main problem, though, was while they were able to eventually develop Kendroma, how do you pronounce it again? Let me just look it up again. A Kendrona sun that they were like a synthetic version they were able to put on their ships so they could leave their homeworld behind and conquer more systems. None of the races they uncovered were really fit. Like the Taxons, which are like big centipede-like creatures, have obsessive hunger and just aren't very well suited for being controlled. Hork-Bajir, while large and powerful, reproduce at a glacial pace and are not very helpful for the expansionary interests of the Yeerks. So they more or less just continued to conquer small species. However, given their overthrow of their Andalite friends, they eventually became involved in a total war between themselves and the Andalites. The actual progress of this war is not extremely clear. The Yeerks are confident that they'll eventually be able to win through attrition. However, the fact that they were defeated so easily by the end of the series, and the fact that the loss of around 250,000 of them utterly crippled their war effort, seems to indicate with me that the war was either a stalemate or the Yeerks were losing on other sides, other fronts, and were constantly expanding and trying to find more powerful host bodies to eventually turn the tide of the war. The opportunity for the Yeerks to finally gain ascendancy and defeat the Andalites and the coalition against them came when they uncovered the planet of Earth in which humans lived. Humans are implied in the Animorph universe to have a much higher reproductive rate than anyone else. The Yeerks, when they came across Earth, I think they said something like we're barely able to take over something like 1 million of them. And for the majority of the series, the Yeerks were barely able to make much progress in assimilating Los Angeles, let alone the rest of the Earth. They only built one Kendroma producing pool within Los Angeles, and they were able to gradually take over some humans, but they didn't go particularly far in that progress. Even so, humans were seen as ideal hosts as they were intelligent, flexible, unlike some of the other species, because humans were had opposable thumbs, they were clever enough, and most importantly, they were inventive. Humans were implied to not only be the fastest producing intelligent race, but also the most inventive, developing technology and new ideas much faster than either the Yeerks or Andalites could. I would almost imagine that there were more humans than there were of any of the other intelligent races put together. But yeah, it was thought that the Yeerks would take a very long time to reproduce enough to assimilate even a small amount of the human population. Needless to say, they only needed to assimilate a very small amount in order to turn the tide of the war in their favor against the Andalites. And as time went on in their war, they sent more and more of their forces to Earth in order to continue to grow their military strength. Throughout the series, though, the Animorphs are able to disrupt the Yeerk operations, and eventually they were forced to turn to outright war with humanity. Outright war was to be avoided because even though the Yeerks were much technologically superior and would dominate humanity, even given their inferior numbers in any real conflict, there was a fear that humans would resort to nuclear weapons or destroying their own population centers in order to stop the Yeerks. And their small numbers meant that humanity was, at least at an individual level, still a threat to them. Besides that, the Yeerks had the immense weakness of only being able to last for 3 days without having to recharge themselves, which made expansion very difficult. It's implied, at least to me, that Kandroma pools are extremely expensive and difficult to build and maintain, hence why they don't build a whole bunch of them. They only had one on Earth, and they had one on their pool ship. So as the war progresses, as I said, the Yeerks bring more and more of their forces to Earth. It's implied that they're losing on other fronts, and they're putting all their eggs in the one basket. The Yeerks have a government run by the Visor system. The Visors are more or less an oligarchy that controls the Empire in an imperial council. However, the Yeerks, being extremely expansionistic and aggressive species, frequently destroy each other in political backstabbing and other forms of maneuvering, and it's exceedingly difficult for them to use their military effectively. Despite their numerous advantages, they had a number of disadvantages, not the least being an incredibly incompetent and ineffective government, with Visor 3 being really the only competent person we see in the series. So as the series progresses, like I said, they get more and more involved in the war with Earth. However, near the end, the Animorphs are able to blow up the Yeerk pool on Earth, and because of this, most of the Yeerks who had been possessing humans wind up dying. They get wiped out. They are able to get rid of most of the Yeerks possessing the government and military by imposing quarantines. And the human military is able to start fighting back, even though they are largely ineffective against the Yeerk's superior power. Visor 3, increasingly getting desperate, brings in a pool ship, which is a massive kind of mothership in which there are hundreds of thousands of Yeerks. Now, this is implied to be a substantial portion of the population. I think there was only like 250,000, including the pool ship, on Earth at any given time. And the idea was they were going to speed up and basically just mass destroy human technology, destroy their major governments and population centers, and just assimilate what they could, as opposed to initially wanting to take all of Earth's population. However, like I said, the destruction of their pool in Los Angeles meant that they were largely incapable of doing this, and the pool ship was eventually attacked by the Animorphs, who succeeded in ejecting all of its passengers into outer space, dealing a mortal blow to the Yeerks. The Yeerks lost most of the fleet that they had sent to Earth, along with the fact that they had destroyed their entire colonization force, and without the Kandroma sun, the remaining Yeerk forces there died out. The Andalites were then able to launch a major offensive on the other fronts, and the depleted Yeerk forces quickly capitulated. As to what happened to the Yeerk Empire after their surrender, it's not entirely clear. It's likely that they were forced out of all their host bodies and sent back to their homeworld to live the rest of their existence as slugs. However, an alternative was offered to them. There's something in the Animorph universe called a Nothlit. A Nothlit is basically if you stay in an animal form for more than 2 hours in the Animorph universe, you're permanently tied to that form. What they offered the Yeerks was morphing technology, so the Yeerks were able to permanently change from being slugs to being an intelligent race, which was considered a much better alternative to living their lives as slugs. And, well, also they weren't really able to get host bodies anymore. Ultimately, the fate of the Yeerk species is largely unknown by the end of the book series. However, like I said, it can be determined their empire was dismantled, all their host species were liberated, and they were driven back to their homeworld, with perhaps some Yeerks being allowed to live in their colonies as Nothlit. I don't know if they were able to reproduce further, though. So the end of the Animorph series, we see humanity beginning to gain the advanced technology of the Andalites, and presumably eventually going to be able to surpass them and build a galactic empire of their own. However, the Yeerks' brief attempts at galactic hegemony had permanently been shattered. It's interesting to note that the Yeerks only became a spacefaring civilization in the 1960s. and their final defeat happened less than 50 years later, making them one of the shortest lasting galactic empires in fiction. I think it's only implied, though, they ever controlled half a dozen worlds at best, much as the Andalites did not control very many due to their long lifespans and need for open spaces. So that's the best I can do to kind of summarize the rise and fall of the Yeerk Empire and their war with the Andalites. Like I said, the galactic political situation is not particularly well explored in the Animorph movies, so that's pretty much the best I can do. Anyways, as always, this has been another episode of Sci-Fi Pulsi. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys later.